So hey there fellow YouTubers, it's Frank Bush here again. So in today's video, I'm going to show a few different technologies I have. In the previous video I showed a really basic solar setup of how to kind of baby step yourself into using solar panels and renewable energy, that kind of stuff. In this video I'm going to show a combination of using the sun rocket, which is a solar cooker, and it's used to boil water. It's really a solar kettle for the lack of a better term. And so I have that unit sitting right here, and then I have the little 30-watt solar panel, and I'm going to use that to power this 12-volt DC cooking pot. Now I'm not going to obviously plug this panel directly into this, it wouldn't provide enough power, but like I showed in the previous video, I've got the little battery set up, and with that battery set up I've attached an additional cigarette lighter adapter to it, and that way I can easily plug 12-volt devices in so I can start to cook and use it for that kind of thing. So I'll shift angles here and kind of show you how I've got this all laid out, yeah? So the first thing I'll show you in this video is I've got one of these sun rockets, and you can get these off eBay and that kind of thing. And really it's a solar powered kettle. I'll open it up and walk through full detail of it, but it's a pretty simple device. You pour your water into the kettle as shown. You open up some reflective panels, aim it at the sun, and let it warm up your food. And for a time scale, let's see if I can get this on the camera, for the time scale of how quickly it'll come up to a boil, you're looking at about an hour and a half. So it takes a little bit of time for it to work, but it is effective. I've used these multiple times. This is actually the second one I own, and I've still got it in the box. I've got the first one I have sitting here, which I've been using for a while now. And like I say, I thought they were so handy I grabbed a second, but these can be a little bit difficult to acquire. So you know, when it comes to wide scale availability of these, not necessarily the best, but I do find them really handy for if you want to do off-grid survival kind of situations where you wanted to have a really small footprint and be able to easily be mobile with the equipment. Having something like the solar kettle is definitely an ideal thing in my perspective. So I'll switch angles here and just show you how simple it is to use and work with this solar kettle, yeah? So like I say, this thing's really simple to operate. So it's got a lid on it where you just put your water into it as you would any other kind of thermos, if you will. And when it comes to heating it up, I don't normally like to fully screw this back on. There's screws on it that'll allow you to kind of tighten it right down, but I don't like to do that while I'm cooking with it. Just in case the pressure really builds up, for some reason the pressure gaskets that exist in here have an issue, they can blow the top off without destroying the unit. So it's just a little safety I like to do, but not necessary. So really, like I say, it's quite a simple device. I showed in previous videos using solar evacuated tubes to boil water and that type of thing, and I had mentioned in those videos about how having additional reflectors would increase the speed in which that they would come to a boil, and this unit really does exactly that. It takes all of that into account. So the reflectors will just add additional light. You simply tilt it back, set it into the sun, and let it sit and do its thing. You know, you come back 90 minutes later, and generally speaking, you know, as long as it's a good clear day, you'll have boiled water. So the volume that this will hold is 500 milliliters, which is 2 cups. So if you're doing freeze-dried meals and those types of things, this would be the ideal volume of water that you would need to bring up to temperature to then add to your meal. So it's good in that regard. Like I say, I find them so handy. I own a couple of them, and this is really a step above the previous model that I showed. It only held a single cup and was really small and lightweight and compact. This one weighs about 2.5 pounds or so, so it's not a really heavy item. It's, you know, weighs about the same amount as a standard thermos. And the one thing I do like about this is because it's already kind of in a thermos style environment where you could set this out, bring your water up to temperature, and then just close it back up and let it be a thermos and keep that water hot for extended periods of time. So, you know, even after the sun had gone down, you could still utilize the hot water that was in it and it would still keep a good temperature, if you will. So that covers the water side of things. Like I say, I'll let this sit for an hour and a half and I'll come back and make myself a hot coffee. Now I'll switch over to the actual cooking of my lunch. So then, like I say, I've got that 30-watt solar panel, And as shown in previous videos, I'll just kind of sidestep here. I've got a cable running, and really I just stretched all this stuff out so you guys could see that, you know, you could have this set up in a tent or something, you know, a small shelter or something, and not necessarily have it all right beside your shelter. You could move it all out depending on the length of the cables you have and that kind of stuff. And, you know, mind you, you have to be cognizant of the reality of voltage and amperage losses through cables, through distance and stuff. But as shown in the previous video, I have my lithium iron phosphate battery with the solar charge controller attached to it, and see if I can turn that on an angle. Right now, hopefully the camera's getting that. I'm picking up about 1.6, 1.7 amps going in. This battery's getting close to full, and all I really did with this setup that was different than I showed in the previous video was simply attached on a cigarette lighter adapter, now that I can plug in 12 volt appliances and that type of thing. So really basic, you know, it just kind of sits here, and then it's got an inline fuse that's a 15 amp fuse sitting in here, and that replaces the need to have you know, fuse board or a fuse block and that kind of thing. So it's a really simple setup, yeah. So the thinking really now is I've just got my 12 volt pot where I've got my, you know, male end of the cigarette lighter adapter. I'll simply plug that into here and start to get that going. So I'll shift angles just to free up my hands here and put the camera back on a tripod and carry on, yeah. But, and I should mention too, I also have other 12 volt appliances. I've got a couple different frying pans and pots and that type of stuff, but I also have things like, this is like a small car oven, if you will. I've used this to cook rice in the past. To give you an idea of the timelines, I cooked 1 cup of dry rice in about an hour, from ice cold water to fully cooked. So, you know, the equivalent of that is about 130, 140 watts in total power, if you will. So that gives you an idea of roughly the volume of energy it'll take to cook things. So for my lunch today, I'm just gonna have a rustic beef and barley soup here. So like I say, let me shift angles and throw this in so I can get things going, yeah? Okay, so I threw the camera up on the tripod just to kind of free up my hands so I can do this. But like I say, it's really, really simple. I simply just plug my cigarette lighter adapter in. You'll see the light lights up. Hopefully the camera's getting that. Tells me that power's feeding into my pot. Pop the lid. I know this table looks a bit of a mess. It's my outdoors table. I really just use it as a place to set down coffee and that kind of thing. I don't normally even sit out in this area, but you know. So for the timelines, to bring this from, you know, environment temperature up to a boil is about an hour or so. And when it comes to the kettle, it's about an hour and a half, give or take. So that kind of gives you an idea of the time scales. I'll shift angles again here to show you. Like I say, there's not much to see now. It'll just kind of carry on cooking. As long as that green light's on, it lets me know that there's still power flowing through and into this unit. So I'll just kind of set that and forget it, then know that it'll come up to a boil in an hour's time. I'll shift back to the battery and just kind of discuss a few details on that too, yeah? So like I say, I thought I'd just kind of do a quick touch base about, you know, what's happening with the battery and that kind of stuff, yeah? So like I say, I simply have the MC4 connectors that are, you know, attachable, detachable. I can just pop them on and off, that connect off to the solar panel sitting over in the sun in the yard. And as I've shown in the previous video, this is really just a simple MPPT solar charge controller that can handle lithium iron phosphate batteries. Nothing complex, and hopefully the camera's picking it up. I'm getting 1.7 amps going in, and that's happening at the same time as I'm cooking the meal. Now with this battery, because this battery is rated at 12.8 volts and 20 ampere hours, and you know, they give ratings to these things, so that works out to about 256 watt hours worth of energy that can be stored in here. So to give you an idea of how much energy that is, to run my cooking pot that I have, the 12 volt cooking pot there, I can run that off this battery from full to dead. It lasts about 2 hours or so. So, you know, you're not able to cook for hours and hours and hours like split pea soup and those types of things, but it does give you the capacity to be able to cook things like canned soups, rice, you know, light and easy things that only take, say, half an hour to cook. And like I say, at the same time, as there's roughly about 10, maybe between 10 and 12 amps that are being drawn off this battery to power that pot. And like I say, at the same time, there's power coming in. Now, the power coming in will directly go to that pot first. So even though it is shown here, that energy will be consumed immediately. So, but what that really does is, if you're cooking food while your panels are sitting out in the sun, the energy coming off of the panel will kind of offset the draw that's happening against these batteries and make it that you're not hitting the batteries as hard. And don't get me wrong, these batteries can take up to about 20 amps pull, you know, without having any issues on them. But the gentler you are with the equipment, the longer lasting the equipment will be. So that's kind of the simplicity that goes on with this setup. As you can see, there's not much to it. You know, I could easily throw this and the solar panel and stuff. Like I say, the solar panel is only a little 30-watt panel, so I could easily throw that into some sort of duffel bag or that type of thing along with my cooking pot and just take it and be mobile with it. You know, I throw in my solar kettle, and I now have the ability, you know, at a fairly light and easily mobile way to go off grid and have it that I can be off grid for extended periods of time. These batteries are rated at about 4,000 cycles, so you know, if I'm using this daily to cook with and that type of thing, it would last me about 10 years before I'd worry about the battery starting to drop in capacitance. And even at that point in time, these batteries are rated to be 80% capacity in them after that 10-year period, you know, so these can last an extremely long time. Now, I really have this whole setup. I want to fuse this in with, if you've watched previous videos of mine, my batteryless solar generator setup and those types of things. With a few wire modifications, and I'll show those in future videos coming, I'll have the capacity to either use this setup completely independent, as I'm showing in this video, and I'll be able to use the batteryless setup completely independent, but I'll easily be able to use them in combination with each other after the sun goes down as well. So I won't touch more on this, other than to really say that, you know, if you go with a battery that's small like this, when it comes to the size of the solar panels that you can hook on, you kind of hit limitations of the input charge that this battery is capable of taking as an input. Can only handle up to about an 80-watt panel max. So, you know, you don't really want to turn around and think that, oh, well, I'll hook on a bunch of really powerful solar panels to this and just use this almost like you would a capacitor or something, where it just kind of helps steady the flow of energy. You know, you don't really want to do that of these batteries at this size. Like I say, it's a 20 ampere hour battery. The batteries at this size are really more ideally suited for, say, a 50-watt or an 80-watt solar panel tops. You know, but if you know how to use your power and balance your input to consumption, you can definitely get a usable amount of power out of these on a regular basis. So I'll cut it here and kind of shift back to cooking my lunch. Yeah. It's 11:25 now. I threw in the soup into the pot about 10 minutes ago. Like I say, it'll be about an hour, but you can already see there's starting to be some steam starting to form on the tops. You know, it's not heavy, but you can definitely see it starting to film up. I can feel a little bit of warmth in the soup already, and that's after 10 minutes time. You know, if you already had food that was, you know, food safe and cooked and that kind of stuff, then you were just wanting to reheat it, it only takes 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm going to show in this example of making sure that I bring things up to a full boil, and then that way, you know, there's no question about the capacity of being able to use these things. So like I say, this is kind of more of the cooking pot. I've got a frying pan, and then this is more of like a small oven. They all use about the same amount of electricity, you know, and generally speaking, I find that when you're using any of these devices, you know, take your time. You just don't be in a rush about it. You know, I know that you could use your stove at home, and in 20 minutes things would be at a full boil and you'd be eating lunch. You know, generally speaking, as a rule, I tend to say whatever it would take me on my stove kitchen at home, I times that by 3. You know, that's my ballpark way of going about things. Quite often stuff ends up being a little overcooked, but when you're out in the field, I'd definitely rather have it be overcooked than undercooked for food safety issues. You know, you don't want to be getting sick when you're out in the middle of nowhere, right? So as you can see, everything just kind of is set up now. There's not much I need to do. There's my solar panels I use to power my living room and that kind of stuff. I think I'm going to be doing some shifting around of how I do things as I move through time. Of those 2 panels that are up there, I think I'm going to install those into these windows, but I'm debating. I've got a solar microwave project that I want to do where I power my microwave purely off solar power, but I'm still haggling over all that stuff. But either way, like I say, you can see this is really simple. Just the small little 30-watt solar panel. I've got the sun kettle, and it's just all doing its thing, right? The wires run across, feed into the solar charge controller, which tags into the battery. The outputs of the battery come off into the cigarette adapter, plugs into the devices. It's really that simple. There's not much to it. You know, having this kind of setup allows me to ditch having the fuse blocks, and it allows me to ditch a lot of the bulk, if you will. You can't really avoid it when it comes to batteries. You know, they are a weight and size, and that's just the way it is. But this type of setup is really good for trying to still have functionality, being able to cook food or run lights and those types of things, but have it be lightweight, so I don't feel like if I was to drag this into an off-grid location, it would be a job to do. But as you can see, you know, I've got about maybe 10-15 foot of cables that all run here, so you could easily have your panels sitting outside of your shelter out in a sun position. You know, your batteries kept in and out of any type of weather and out of the rain and that kind of thing. The only kind of weakness in this setup really is these aren't cold rated batteries. You can get lithium iron phosphate batteries that have cold rating to them, so that you can use them below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. Because with the chemistry makeup in these batteries, you know, if you charge them, you can discharge them fine below 0 or below 32. You know, you can discharge them without issue, but if you try to charge these batteries below a freezing temperature, you can do damage to the battery permanently. And you know, so in order to avoid that, if you wanted to use this type of basic setup, you know, in colder type environments, you can get cold weather versions of these that have internal heaters built into them, that when you plug in your solar panels and that type of thing, the solar panel will actually flick on a heating element inside the battery and bring it up to temperature, so it's then safe to charge. They're normally a little pricier, and in the location I live in, the frequency that it gets below freezing is minimal at best, so I don't worry about it. But you know, if you're looking at wanting to do this kind of setup, you definitely want to consider the environment you live in and whether you're going to need a cold version of these batteries or not. So while I'm waiting for lunch to cook, I'm just brushing off the solar panels. It's pollen season in the location I'm in, and it's a really bad year this year for it. So I find that you know, most of the year you don't have to do this, but when you're in the spring, the pollen can be bad, so you have to be kind of mindful of getting it off your panels, or if you get a thick layer of it, it can impact your performance of the panels. Yeah. 11:45 now. It's been about half an hour or so. As you can see, the light's still going here, so I know that the power is still happening, and I can see water starting to really condensate down on the amount of steam coming off that. And look, I'm already at a boil. Hopefully the camera's picking that up. There's a simmer going on at this point in time, so this is definitely hot enough I can cook with already, or eat, sorry, I mean. If I let that sit for another 10 minutes or so, I could probably get it up to an even fiercer boil, but yeah, it's pretty piping hot already. So that was within a half hour's time. So, you know, if you're just using this to do canned food and that kind of thing, easily be able to use this in a half hour's time. And the battery capacitance, like I said, could cook for about 2 hours, so potentially you could do off, you know, 3 meals a day kind of thing and still have a bit of power for lights and stuff. I wouldn't recommend that. I'd tend to do maybe 2 meals a day and use it for lights, you know, for the rest. But the one thing to keep in mind too is, because of the restriction the battery has for the amount of amps you can put into it, it normally takes, say, about 10 hours of sunlight to charge those batteries, or this specific battery and the setup I have, from dead all the way up to full takes about 10 to 12 hours. So you definitely need good sun conditions, and generally speaking you want to kind of have a bit of buffer where you're not using your battery to its full capacity every single day. It's not really healthy for the electronics, but to help offset things and augment it, if you're out in a survival situation, you're going to be cooking, and yeah, I can still see the simmer comes. But like I say, as soon as you take the lid off, it cools a bit and will slow. But I'll cut back again in 10-15 minutes, and then I'll just eat this, because I don't want it to get too hot. I can't even eat it, right? Alright, well. So hopefully the camera's picking that up, of the bubbling and stuff all in through here. Like I say, it won't come up to a fierce boil this quick on. If I let it sit for another half hour or so, it would. But I'm too hungry to be waiting. So at this point in time, I'm going to see it as this soup is cooked and eat it, because I'm hungry. So it's really simple. All you got to do is unplug that. You're done. I put the cap back on just to keep any bits out of there. And I'll pull the camera off here and just kind of switch back. So you can see the voltage and stuff on the battery, 25 degrees Celsius. So we're in the mid 70s Fahrenheit. Battery's at 13.2, 13.3 volt, 1.5 amps going in. So I'll just let the battery and stuff sit now. It doesn't need to move or anything. It's just gonna recharge back up again. And like I say, it's just as simple as that. Here's my improv tripod. I've shown how to make these types of things in previous bushcraft videos, so if you've watched previous bushcraft videos of mine. But at this point in time, I'm famished. I want my lunch. And when I finish my soup and that, I'll shift over and see where my coffee's at and how hot the water is and that kind of stuff. But you can see the pollen. I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but just a film of pollen gets on everything within an hour or two. So unfortunately it's the season we're in, but it's the same thing on the reflectors of the solar kettle there. You can see little bits of pollen. That kind of stuff will impact the performance and speed at which this thing works, unfortunately. It's the same with the solar or anything. The more stuff gets in between the sun and the collectors, the more unfortunate it is. But either way, we'll just let that sit. I'll have a coffee after I have my soup. Because I'm a savage animal, I won't even bother dirtying a pot, or a bowl, I mean. Yes, I know, I have too much salt in my diet. That's alright, I'm okay with that. When the doctor checked the levels, they turned to me and said I should have more salt in my diet. I laughed and laughed. It's something about my body just seems to be able to handle it. Oh, yeah. It's super tasty, but yeah, that's hot, man. But as you can see, if you were cooking foods that were out of cans and stuff where that there was no risk of any type of food poisoning or anything else, half an hour is plenty of time to have yourself a hot soup, that kind of stuff. Like I say, that's so hot I can barely even eat it. But if I was using this to cook off wild edibles that I gathered from the field and that type of thing, I would definitely want to make sure that, yes, in this example, in a half hour's time this came up to a simmer, but I would definitely want to let this cook for another half hour or so to ensure that any pathogens or any type of little nasties that'll make you sick when you're out in the field are going to be gotten rid of as quickly as possible. You definitely don't want to take any chances when you're off grid at all. But like I say, I won't bother putting it all on camera, but I'm going to turn around and have myself this soup, and then I'll switch over and make myself a coffee out of the solar kettle. Yeah. All right, so I'm finished my soup, and it's been about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe an hour and a half or so. This had come up to a full boil in an hour and a half. I don't necessarily need that. I've got potable water that I put in it to begin with, but what I'll do is, I just wanted to kind of stop and show in detail here. So what I'll do is kind of show you how this works now. So there's this metal arm, and locks into little slots. I'll shift angles and show you better what I'm talking about, but in essence that just closes, and this comes down, and you're back to having a thermos again. And like I say, easy enough to turn around and just screw on that top. I'm not going to do that right at this second. I'll shift angles and I'll show you the inside of this tube, and then I'll discuss, I'd call it a hack, but it's not really a hack, of the best way to get optimal performance out of this solar kettle. So let me just shift the camera angles and then I'll come back, yeah? So first order of business, I'll just pop off the top. You can see the steam coming off. Hopefully the camera caught that. But try to look into there. See some bubbles coming up. It's probably about 80 degrees Celsius, give or take. Oh, yeah, it's really hot in there. So needless to say, I'll set the camera up and then I'll talk about this stand and kind of what I've found. Like I say, you can see the steam keeps coming off. I'll just keep the lid on to keep the heat in before I throw it into my coffee cup. But yeah, let me just shift angles and I'll show you in detail what I was talking about with the stand. So I just opened it back up again, and hopefully the camera is giving this justice, but you'll see the stand has these slots, and then they kind of come out in like an L shape and a reverse L on the other side, where the stand kind of locks in, and then you just tilt it back and set it. But what I found is, I'll just turn this around. So what I found was, when you're, see if I can catch this on camera. So when you're aiming this at the sun, you want as much of the mirrors as possible to be reflecting onto this vacuum tube, and that's really what increases the performance. But what I found was, with the little L shapes, if the stand is sitting all the way back into the L shapes, you can still see a bunch of silver color, and that tells you that the you should see it from the camera's perspective. You should see it where it's almost entirely black, where it's reflecting the black of the vacuum chamber. The black surface on the inside of this should be reflecting on the mirrors, so you see it almost entirely as just a black surface within the mirrors. And that's simply not the case for what's being seen here. So what I found is, if they were moved forward a bit, hopefully the camera's catching that, the mirrors become far darker. What that tells you is that the reflection would be shining more directly onto the black surface inside the vacuum chamber. So when it comes to, I'll just spin it back around again. So when it comes to the stand and how it connects into these L's, what I found is it's not actually ideal to have them locked tight into these L's, but it's better to actually have them kind of set a bit up where the container doesn't close, or it doesn't, the doors don't open quite as wide, and it really gives a more ideal angle when it comes to the sun's reflecting onto the black surface. That as soon as you drop it down, you see how it shifts back? That small shift will cause a lot of the sunlight that the reflectors are shining to not optimally reflect onto the black surface. So if you own one of these and you're wanting to kind of tweak its performance a little bit, like I said, when I go to set them, I don't lock them into those L's. I kind of just half set it, and it's still enough to keep the container from, you know, being unstable or anything else, but it shifts the doors closed a little bit and makes the performance increase a significant amount in my perspective. So that was just a little, I don't know, you call it a hack, I guess, but the way to really use these sun rockets, the solar kettles, to get the best performance out of them as possible. So, and like I say, as it goes for the volume, it's a significant volume of water that's in this kettle. I can easily fill up this coffee cup, and this is a large coffee cup, it's not small, and I'll just pour it out. It's wasteful, but whatever. Now, there was a little bit of water left, so I can make myself a good sized coffee, if you will, in that regard. Just let that sit. But ideally, for things like freeze-dried foods that you have, quite often the packages of those will call for 2 cups of hot water, and this holds exactly that. So this is a great combination match to use with freeze-dried foods and those types of things, you know, to cook food, if you will, at its most basic level when you've got the freeze-dried food. You don't even need to have the solar panels and the batteries and everything else. If you got the luxury to be able to afford freeze-dried when you're out in the field and you know you're gonna have decent weather, having something like this along can easily cook your meals for you. You know, you set this up in the morning, you come back at lunchtime, it's ready to make yourself your freeze-dried, you know, lunch meal. Throw a bit more water into it, come back later on in the day and have yourself dinner. Yeah, that's at this point in time, that's too hot to actually drink. I'll have to let that sit for a minute, but it gives you an idea of the effectiveness of these types of technologies. And you can see when using in combination with the solar panels and that kind of stuff, you can have very small, lightweight setups. All of the gear I've shown in this video, you know, it's maybe $300 total. So, and all of that bought over time and just pieces and stuff, really, it's my scraps that I have from other projects that I've done in the past. But, you know, obviously the kettle I bought to use and that kind of thing. But this thing's great. You know, it doesn't totally replace your need for fuel when you're out in the field, but it can definitely offset your need for fuel, which to me is a key thing, really, of you want to have as little footprint as possible and not have to pack in fuels and those types of things. You know, these types of alternatives, you know, even though they're not super mainstream at this point in time, they definitely have their purpose. So, you know, if you're wanting to go off grid, and this type of stuff could give you extended long grid or long-term off grid quasi-sustainability, I'll call it. You know, in my lens, when it comes to self-reliance technologies like these types of things, you know, people always look for a silver bullet that's going to solve 100% of the problems, you know, like cooking food and those types of things. I'm of a different approach. I sit back and say, if you have multiple things that solve it 50% of the time, you'll get to the point of having self-reliance just by having a volume of goods, you know, and you can slowly acquire them as you move through time, you know. And so yeah, I'll cut it here. Like I said, thanks for joining me on my lunch and that kind of thing. Really, that's all it was me just wanting to cook lunch in my backyard without having to use any electricity off the stove or any of that. But if you enjoy this type of content, please like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching. Cheers. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but lots of steam coming off that, and it's in the mid-70s, mid-20s Celsius, mid-70s Fahrenheit. Thanks for watching. Cheers.